Okay, cool. So I'm actually super excited about this class because one of my passions is really teaching people how to read transits and go from just learning the natal aspect to really watching their chart in real time. So I think this class is going to be really useful today. So we always do an introduction slide. So I gotta get on my keynote here. Sadly, people see my desktop and sometimes they're horrified. Okay, how to approach reading transits is class for today. Now you notice that the title is not how to read transits. If it was that easy, we would all be doing it. I think it's the question of like how to actually approach the study of reading transits is the question here because, there is planets in transit, which I love this book more than any other astrology book, really. And it's like, who has this? Raise their hand. Okay, so Linda, do you have this book yet? Because she's frozen. So yeah, with planets in transit and the ephemeris, you should be able to really start watching your transits. But then it's kind of, in some ways, not that easy because it's a clock with 10 hands. And it's like, how do you read a clock with 10 hands? Well, first of all, how often do you check the clock? I have some astrologers say, well, I don't check the transits very often because I don't like to be too dependent on astrology and stuff. And I'm like, well, how often do you check the clock? Because that'd be like me saying, oh, I don't like to check the clock too much. I don't like to be dependent on time. Well, it's kind of like at some point you have to know what time it is. The same with transits is like you'll be in a mood and you're like, I need to know where the planets are. I need to know what time it is. So it's like the first approach I want you to take is look at the transits as often as you need to. And I would say don't feel guilty about that because good astrologers are the ones that I know check the transits constantly. And it's not like it's an overwhelm. It's kind of just information gathering of like, oh, moon is conjunct Mars right now. That's why I'm kind of crabby. Okay, I'll be crabby for 2 more hours. I got this. It's like it's so I. No, Linda, do you have planets in transit? The book.
I don't know, probably.
Here, I'll show it to you. This book.
Oh, the book. Yes, I've got the book. I thought you were asking me if I actually had planets that were in transit right now.
Oh, no, no, no. I just want to know. You have this book. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
I do.
And then do you have an ephemeris?
Not a physical one. There's one in the software that I use,
Okay,
but I
cool.
don't have a paper copy.
Okay, cool. All right. And Sage, do you have a paper ephemeris?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, cool. All right. So now let's do an introduction, which is what is your name? How long have you been studying astro? And do you watch the transits? And if so, how often do you look at that clock? Okay, so let's start with you, Linda.
My name is Linda Hello. I've been on and off studying astrology for many years, but more so in the last year, concentrating more on it than I have in the past. And do I watch transits? Kind of, but I really don't, since I don't really fully understand what I'm looking at just on a day-to-day basis. I don't really fully understand how the transits are going to work. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, cool. Sage.
Yeah, I'm Sage, and I have been learning astrology since I was 17, but then not for a lot of years, and I'm just picking it back up again. And I'm watching now because of you, I'm watching the transits. I've been watching the transit of the moon every day for just a little over a month now. So,
Interesting. So
and then before I would watch transits if like things were going really super terrible in my life, then I'd be like, why are they going so terrible?
which is actually a perfect use of watching transits is like what is going on right now. You know how you can feel it like you get in 3 fights with friends in one week, no one likes you this week, and you're like, what is going on in my chart or whatever, and then you look at the transits. I think that's a legit look. We should have a name for that, like the trauma look. No, the drama look. When there's too much drama and we're like, what is going on? Okay. But Sage, tell us, how has watching the moon transit around your chart for a month, has it changed you or what have you learned?
I think I'm just now that I'm looping around the second time, I'm just now learning things. Because I just all I did is I just wrote down notes like how did I feel, what was going on in the day. But now that it's looping again, I'm like, oh, there's like a pattern here. Like there are days that are harder for me, more intense, and I'm like, yeah, because look at what was, I mean, because it's the moon going over planets or activating some aspects or something. So now I'm learning.
Nice. Well, and that is one of the things about watching transits consistently for a long time is you learn that natal infrastructure. You're like, oh, my XY square is really hard. And whenever I have a transit to that, I get in a bad mood or whatever. So I think that repeated look at the transits helps you uncover those natal aspects and then you know yourself. And then you can start doing predictions of like, I predict when Mars hits this natal aspect, I will feel XYZ. And like, so yeah, I think that you're doing great. It's going to make you a much stronger astrologer. Okay, Shane.
I'm Shane. I've been studying astro now for about a year. Um, yes, I watch transits pretty much daily. Like, I may not check it quite every day, but I rarely go more than 2 days without looking at transits.
And what are you looking for?
I'm mostly looking for what's happening on my chart. So, checking it daily, I'm looking largely at the moon.
Okay. Now, are you looking for a specific aspect in your chart? Are you watching for just like the whole thing or getting to know it or
I'm watching for the whole thing. Like I want to know what is being hit in my natal chart by what's going around right now.
okay.
I pay particular attention to my T square to know when I've got something coming up for that, because that can be a very challenging personality aspect to deal with.
Okay. All right, cool. All right, so let's start with a transit. What is a definition? We could say it's a moving planet that causes something to happen either globally or in your natal chart. If you think about transit, like we all have a transit system in our town, it's, buses going from here to there. And so the transit literally means something going from here to there, so that's why it's not our natal aspects, it's the moving that's all we mean by a transit. It's a moving planet, and but you can also sometimes I call them transitions. Like when I'm talking about a transit to a client, I'll be like, well, in the transition you're in, because it does transition you from one mood to another, or so sometimes that's useful. Now, it's a moving planet that causes something to happen globally or in your natal chart. So, was there a transit when Donald Trump got shot in the ear?
I'm sure there was.
Oh, there was. It was Mars and Uranus were conjunct, and which causes sudden, unexpected attacks or explosions, or like people on a personal level will just like go off and yell and things like that. But a shooter is very Mars Uranus conjunction. So it's like we could have looked. A lot of political astrologers are looking at the transits and saying, how is this affecting things politically, globally? We always think of transits as being like to our natal chart, but I think one thing for us to learn is we can look at the transits of planets to understand what's going on globally also. It doesn't always have to be personal, it can be global. Okay. So an example of this would be like, let's say the sun and Mars came together in the sky. Like, all of a sudden, or I know right now in Gemini, Mars and Jupiter are conjuncting. Okay. So, um, that's going to be going on for the next 19 days, right? So globally, that's going to affect a bunch of all people at one time. Like we know that Mars and Jupiter are going to make more talking because it's in Gemini, right? Like, so we just see people talking, going to class more, whatever. We might see news reporters talking even more. There might be flurries of news or things like that. But then the second stage is to look at what is that hitting in my natal chart? What is my experience of that global experience?
Mm.
Does that make sense? Okay. What is zeitgeist? Anyone know?
The
Uh, Go
pulse
ahead.
of the moment.
The pulse of the moment. Okay. Linda?
Yeah, that's it's kind of hard to give a clear definition. I kind of know what it is, but I think that probably isn't the easiest way to say it.
Okay. What about if we were saying, okay, so let's say we were looking at an artist from the 1920s and we'd be like, they really captured the zeitgeist of the 20s. What did they capture?
the spirit or mood of the particular moment in history.
Okay, beautiful. So the qualitative clock or the transit clock or the 10-handed clock it really affects the spirit of the people, the zeitgeist, right? Artists actually pick up on the spirit of the people and they make art that reflects that at the time period. That's why art history is so fascinating. But it's like there is something palpable to zeitgeist. It's like all of a sudden, like crop tops and bell bottoms come out for, 10 years. And you're like, wow, this is really changing the zeitgeist here. It's like, or like in the roaring 20s, there was like a party mood for 10 years or whatever. So it's like, what is the mood of a time period? And so I think when we're looking at the transits, the first thing we want to say is like, we're looking at the clock of the moods, the clock of the feelings. It's not like, is it 1 o'clock or 3 o'clock? It's like, what time is it? It's time to party. What time is it? It's time to get in a fight. You know what I mean? It's like, what time is it? It's time to work hard. And maybe the moon's conjunct Saturn, right? So it's like when you're asking yourself why to look at transits, well, you're trying to look at what time it is. But it's like, what time is it? There's a word in Greek, it's called kairos time. And there's chronos time, which is like, is it 1 o'clock or 3 o'clock? We get the word chronology from that. But kairos, I'm going to actually get out my Greek dictionary, my tiny Greek dictionary. I want to read about kairos time because they say that the charts are looking into kairos time. Sorry, this is a big book. I would have had this prepped, but I didn't know I was going to do this. Okay, kairos, it's due measurement, proportion, or fitness. So it's like, is this time fit for a fight? It's like, maybe it's like the moon's conjunct Venus and fighters are going in and they won't really get too rowdy. And you're like, it's not time for a fight. It's not, the weather's not fit for a fight right now. So it's like measure, it's the exact or critical time or season or opportunity. So the actual, kairos time is the timing of certain opportunities, right? So when we're watching the transits, we're looking at, it's like Mars and Jupiter conjunct in Gemini. This is an opportunity to talk. If the moon is conjunct Saturn, we say it's an opportunity to work right now. That song, that to every season turn, there is whatever. It's like there's a season for all things, right? Like some seasons are good for planting and some seasons are good for harvesting. And that's the same with watching transits. So this is saying critical times, periodic states, times of the day. So I want you to actually have a different use of the word time. When you look at the transit clock, you're like, what time is it? It's not like, is it 1 o'clock or 3 o'clock, but is it time to party? Is it time to work? Is it time to do surgery? Does that make sense? That's a different use of the word time. Okay. So zeitgeist is the defining spirit or mood of a particular period of history as shown by the ideas and beliefs of the time. Okay. But we can even look at the moon today and be like, what is the defining spirit or mood of the day? What is the moon in right now? Is it in Leo?
Yeah,
Are we in Leo? Are we in a new moon in Leo today? I didn't look. Okay. So
close.
close. Okay. So we could be like, well, the spirit of today is really, alive and warm and, kind of like expressive, that would be the spirit of today. But the spirit of yesterday when the moon was in Cancer was like, I want to be at home. I want to be cooking. See what I mean? So it's like, I think we're looking at the zeitgeist even of the day. Okay. How do we watch the transits? We're looking at the zeitgeist. Okay. No. Okay. So now here's some ways to actually look at the transits technically. Okay. And I know this is why you're really here. Okay. The first way to look at transits is to get out an ephemeris. Okay. Now, Linda has an ephemeris on the computer, which works just as well. But you literally get out your ephemeris and look at where all the planets are on a certain day. Okay. Now, why does that not even help? You're looking at it, you're like, well, that doesn't help me. Well, there's something missing. Okay. We need a wheel to put the planets on. So if you're looking at the general spirit and mood of the people, and it's not not looking at a natal chart, you can just make an Aries rising chart. Now, I don't know how you guys do this in your software programs. I'm a by hand kind of astrologer, but so I just quickly, while I was talking, made a blank Aries rising chart. Okay? And so then if I looked at a certain day in the ephemeris and I saw where all the planets were, I would just put them on this circular wheel. So let's say I said the sun was at 5 Aries. I would just literally write sun at 5 Aries. Okay? Then let's say the moon was at 5 Gemini. I would just literally write the moon at 5 Gemini. And I would see then that there's an angle, a sextile between them. That's another class, is like how to really read angles or aspects. But that is what we do in transits, is we watch what are the angles between the planets, how are they interacting. You know, let's say I saw that the sun was conjunct Saturn in Aries. You know, I would write the Saturn right next to it, and I might even get out my crayons and draw in, because Aries is red, I might just actually draw in some red around my sun Saturn so I could understand it a little better. And I would be like, okay, it's a red kind of mood. It's a feisty kind of mood. Things are getting kind of warm around here. Okay. If the sun was in Cancer, I'd draw a peach around it. And I'd be like, okay, we're in peach tones. Everyone's kind of chill, you know. But like color theory will help you so much with the moods of the moment, right? So it's not but first we have to technically get the planets onto a circle. Okay. Now, do you guys understand why I used an Aries rising chart here? Linda, do you understand why?
Because it's the first, the zodiac year starts in Aries.
Absolutely. So it's
I'm
just
not sure.
exactly. So I'm just making the start of like just a basic template chart, right? Where I'm just making like it doesn't really give a house to each sign. It just is like, here's an air where, you know, what's in Aries, what's in Taurus. Because a lot of when we're looking at the general zeitgeist, we don't need the houses, right? We don't need to know what house the Aries is in, because we're just looking at the mood of the moment. We're not looking at the houses of the moment. Does that make sense? So for the general, you know, you could do it on a noon chart. You could put arbitrarily any sign here, but you realize you're just looking at the signs. Like I also want to know the moons in Gemini, so I take out my blue crayon and I make some blue around here. And so now I know it's the throat chakra is blue, so I'm like, okay, the throat chakra of people is busy and they're really feisty. Okay, I can kind of see the mood coming out. Okay, so you might think, why is she using crayons? That's so silly. Well, it's actually, we're looking at a clock of the mood. Like, how do you express mood or tone without color, smell, sound? You know, so it's like, get out your crayons and start watching transits, because you're going to see tones and moods expressing themselves. Like, one of your homeworks would be to put the chart of the current moment onto a wheel. Okay, so Sage and Linda, I want you to draw an Aries rising wheel, and I want you to write all of the current transits on it. So the way you would do this is you could go to astro.com and see this button right here. Do you guys all know about the current planets button right there?
Yeah.
So you can look at the current planets and just draw those on a chart. And you can color them in, like you can Google Leo colors, because the sun's in Leo, the moon's in Leo. Google that and then draw the colors on there. Shane.
If you click on chart of the moment down at the bottom there, no, go back up, click on the planets to get the positions for the moment. At the bottom of that box, it says chart of the moment.
What? I never knew that in all my years of being an astrologer. Oh my God, I've been doing this by hand this whole time.
But like, do you know why this doesn't start with Aries?
Yes, I can tell you why it doesn't, because it's looking at where the sun is right now. See how the sun's at the middle of the top of the chart? If you look at the sun right now, it's around noon. It's going to be right
Oh,
above
it's
your head.
wow. Okay.
So,
Thank you.
see how the moon's right next to it? It's because it's a new moon, like they're really close to each other. So if we look up, should we be able to see the moon right now?
No, I don't think so. It's too close to the sun.
Good. The sunbeams go about like 15 degrees on either side. So the moon is actually under the beams of the sun, so we won't be able to see it. But now you know the moon's up there up at top of the sky too. But so yeah, we would see here that there's
Oh,
a
cool.
Scorpio rising chart actually right now.
At this moment.
Yes.
Cool.
Okay. So that makes it even easier, you guys. So just look at the chart of the moment and then put, draw it. Although it might be a good exercise for you to also make an Aries rising chart and then just take what you're seeing in the planetary positions and then find them on the map and draw it yourself. I think that's a good, just making sure you understand what's happening there and then you can compare it to the chart of the moment. But do you guys understand that how we knew that the Scorpio is rising? Because the sun rises in Leo at rising and then it's carrying this Leo. It's like driving in the Leo car and then all of a sudden by noon it's up here. Does that make sense? And that would be the Scorpio rising then. Okay. So Linda, you look confused. What
No, I'm looking at my chart on one screen and listening on the other. I mean, so yeah, that's probably why I had that look on my face.
Okay. Okay, well, so you guys, let's get even more confused. Okay, what we could also do is take the chart of the moment and draw it on our chart. Okay, that would be what are the transits of the current moment to us, right? So we would go back to that chart of the moment and we would say, so let's just take that sun in Leo. Okay, so Linda, you are a Sag rising, right?
Yes.
Okay, so see how the sun in Leo would be placed on the 11th, or I'm sorry, the 9th house? Because you have Leo on the 9th house, right?
Not right now, according to what I'm looking at. I have it on the 10th.
Okay, can we get a whole sign house chart? Or do you
It-
know how to do that?
It is whole sign. It is whole sign.
Well, then, if you're a Sag rising, Leo should be on the 9th. Can you screen share what you're seeing?
Yeah. How do I do that? Let's see. Share. Can you see that?
Yes,
No.
I see. This has you as a Scorpio rising.
Well, this is transit chart for today.
Oh, okay. No,
According
no, no.
to-
Now I want you to put
Oh,
this
you're talking about my,
on your natal chart. Yeah.
okay.
Oh,
So
I see.
anyway, so this is my natal chart is the center. The center,
Okay.
this is my natal chart.
I
And
see.
then this is to the transit
Okay.
today.
So you see how the transit sun in Leo is on your 9th house?
Yes.
Okay. So I want you to be able to understand that by hand. So like it might be cool for you to print out a chart of your own, your own version of your own chart. Just print it out on a printer, and then draw in the current planets on it. So like, here's your Sag rising and the sun in Leo. You would go and add the sun at 11 Leo, and that's why it's in your 9th house. Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't. This is what confuses me. The last time we went, a few months ago when we were doing a class, and okay, so I'm looking at this and it's my natal says 9th house, but then on the outer wheel it says 10th house. So I guess it confuses me when you say the sun is in Leo in the 9th of my natal. Why I'm just confused by that because it's
Okay,
showing 10th right
I
here.
think you know
You know
why
what I'm
it's
saying?
doing that. You know why it's doing that? Is because in the chart of the moment, the sun's in the 10th house of the chart of the moment.
Okay.
But that's actually why this is why I don't like computers. Is like I don't actually care about the chart of the moment. Like we're now taking I mean I care about the chart of the moment, but like I care about the planets in the signs. Like In the ephemeris, when I look at my ephemeris and I go down the line, I don't see a rising sign. I just see tables of planets. Like it'll just say like the sun at 10 Leo, and it doesn't tell me if it's in the 10th house or the, Shane.
Right, can I share
Okay.
my astro.com thing and see if that's more like what you're looking for, Andy?
Sure.
Uh, all right. So I turned on in my chart selection here, I did the natal chart and transits.
Okay.
So this is my natal chart, but then on the outside, you see where the planets are currently.
Okay.
So
Good.
I'm Virgo rising, so I've got Leo in the 12th house, and there's the sun in Leo.
Okay. Perfect.
Is that what you're talking about? Or are you
Absolutely.
talking about getting it to draw the lines from the sun to my aspect charts?
No, that's too much. That's too much. So that's what I'm trying to get you guys to realize is in order to watch transits, you have to take your natal chart and then put that where the current planets are, you have to draw it onto your wheel, right? Like so it's like what they did here is do that for you. So the sun is at 11 Leo. We know that because if we won't go to current planets, we see sun at 11 Leo. And
Right,
then
and here's
here
11th
it's
Leo,
it's
drawn
placed
on my
exactly. So for you, Linda, if we took Sun at 11 Leo, it would be placed in your ninth house natally. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get it now. Having explained it the way you did, I understand it now. So it's almost like that, putting that 10 in there is too much information I don't really need to know. But if I really was looking at it and I knew what I was doing and I go, oh, well, today it really is in the 10th house, but that's not what I'm caring about on this chart. I'm caring about where it would be in my natal. So that makes sense. Thank you.
Beautiful. Okay. So yeah, like every time a planet goes through Leo, it will be on your ninth house. And every time it goes through Virgo, it'll be on your 10th house. And this is why I like to do things by hand or have my students do things by hand is because it actually I don't know, it teaches you what the computer program is actually doing. So a lot of students at the phase where you're at, Linda. Now Sage, you're at the phase where you do so does this make sense to you to take up the current planet and put it onto your natal? Does that make sense to you, Sage?
Yeah, because I do. Oh, so that's what I'm doing. Like I draw the chart. And so in this case, I only have, I mean, because I'm tracking the moon. So I have the moon with my chart. But if I could add any other planet out here, I could throw the whole,
Beautiful. So
yeah.
you're right. I see what you're doing. You have your natal chart and then you put the moon on it and then you write about it in your journal. That's
Yeah.
That's phenomenal. Okay, so see how that distills it down to be a little bit more handleable because you're like watching, there's a 10-handed clock, but you're just watching one hand, which makes it a
Yeah.
lot more palatable. So, Linda, it might actually be really cool for you to just start watching one or two hands of the clock, like just the sun hand of the clock and noticing where it changes every day. That should be 1 degree a day it changes. But the moon will change every, it goes 13 degrees a day. So that's an interesting one to watch. But yeah, that's cool to realize you can put one hand of the clock on that thing and just focus on that hand of the clock. You don't have to put all 10 with all aspects, which just gets overwhelming, right? Um, Now, there is something that our students tend to do at this phase, and I don't think you have yours built right now, do you, Shane? But they take their chart and they put it on a magnet board and like a whiteboard, and then they put magnets of the planets outside of the chart. And so they just literally move the magnet. And Linda, that might be where you're at, where it's like you just print out your chart and then you can move the moon 13 degrees a day and just watch it. So you look at the current moon and you're like, okay, it's at X degree, and you just put that on the chart, and then you start seeing what it does to the chart. Then you move it 13 degrees. And so that makes it really visual for people and not so much noise on the computer also. So just a thought. Don't get frustrated. Once you get this, you'll get it. It can be a bear to learn to watch transits, but it's so worth it. Okay. So this slide is just telling us different ways to uncover the transits. So like I said, you can get out the ephemeris and just literally place those planetary, when you look at an ephemeris, you'll see tables of the planets, you know, it'll be like here's the sun at X degree on this date. And if, you know, I could be looking at this date and be like, okay, the sun's at, I can't see this, but like, you know, 6 Leo, and then you just take that and you draw 6 Leo on your chart. So literally ephemeris to wheel. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is look at an online ephemeris and go from there to the wheel. And go, or you can go to current planets and draw those on the wheel. Okay, so those are just 3 ways to actually get the planets from the ephemeris onto your chart. Okay, that's what this slide is about. Do we all feel like we can do this, or do we need to spend more time here? I'm fine either way. All right.
I think I'm good.
I'm good.
Okay, cool. Linda, if we want to meet for some time and make sure that you can do that piece, I'm happy to do that with you. Okay. Oh, you can go to astro.com and make a chart for the moment. I just learned how to do that now.
Okay, never mind.
Okay, now part of reading trends is making meaning of them. And one of the reasons I like a book ephemeris is you can actually read back and forth into the future. Like we can look at that current planets button in astro.com, but it's like we can only look at the snapshot of like this moment, right? But how do we go forward and back in history? Yeah, with computer programs, you can advance it and then look, or you can go backwards and look. But what I like to do is, like, for example, if you're, let's say you're tracking Jupiter, you know, if you look in the ephemeris, you'll see, you know, Jupiter, it starts here. Sorry, I wish you could see this a little bit better. I should have like done a slide or something. But you can watch Jupiter's movement all through the month. And like you can read the ephemeris, like you can look at this month and then watch Jupiter next month and then watch the month after, and you're like, oh, I see that Jupiter goes up to 15, stops, goes back, and then stops, and then goes forward. You know, so a lot of the reason to have a book ephemeris is to read into the future and read into the past. A lot of working astrologers, you know, kind of look into the next 6 months and say like, where's Saturn for the next 6 months? Where's Jupiter? And then when their clients come in, they kind of know Jupiter's within this span, Saturn's within this span. So that's how people look for Mercury retrogrades also, is they'll just read in the ephemeris and they'll see Mercury's traveling, and then all of a sudden it goes backwards and then it goes forwards. And in the ephemeris, when a planet goes backwards, it turns dark. Like you'll see the ephemeris go dark. Here's an example of that. So here's Mercury. So it's going, Mercury is going forward, and then see where it goes dark? That's it going backwards, and then it goes forwards again right here. That's a Mercury in retrograde in the ephemeris. Okay, so that's why to have a book ephemeris is you can read the transits forward, and it gives you more of a strategic planning element of like, I can plan for what's coming. Okay. All right, now here's different ways to approach looking. Okay. You can actually read or track the movement of one planet at a time. Okay, so we've talked about that with the moon, but why? Okay, Mars. Now let's say we're just looking at the general people, the general zeitgeist. We're not putting it on your chart. Okay, we're just looking at generally. Well, if we watch the Mars cycle, we would look for when are people going to be crabby, right? So let's say you notice Mars walking and all of a sudden it conjuncts the sun. Would you notice that that week, maybe people are going to be more crabby than normal? Right? Does that make sense? Then maybe the moon walks up and it conjuncts Saturn. What might we see there? We just had that in Pisces. Okay, we might see frustration, feeling blocked. You know, Mars is like you're trying to take action, and Saturn is like there's a blockage there. So now, what if you wanted to know, you saw in the ephemeris that well, you're just reading the book of the ephemeris and you see Mars and Saturn are conjunct. They're in the same sign, in the same degree, okay? And if you're drawing them on a circle, which you remember, that's part of watching transits, is to take it from the ephemeris and put it on a circle. And if you put it down here and you saw Mars and Saturn were literally at the same place on the circle, you'd say, okay, that's a conjunction. Then you can get out your planets in transit book and read about Mars Saturn conjunct. Okay? Because that's how you find the meaning of the transit, is you read about it. At least when you're beginning. When you've been doing this for 20 years, you know absolutely what a Mars Saturn is. But then maybe you notice the Mars comes up and it conjuncts Mercury. And you're like, oh my God, people are going to be like really verbally aggressive at that point. So then you get out your planets in transit and you read Mars conjunct Mercury. Okay. Does that make sense that you can look at one planet to see what the transits will be? And that is one way to watch a transit, right? We're taking all 10 hands and we're now distilling it down to one question at a time. Okay. If we were watching for Mercury, we'd say, how will people be communicating? And that's why people trip on Mercury in retrograde. They're like, oh no, during this time, communication will be off. Well, that's because they're just watching the Mercury cycle and they notice, okay, here it's going to go backwards, so things are going to be weird. And then for 4 months, it goes through these signs, and then here it goes backwards. But maybe in the Mercury cycle, you see Mercury come up and it conjuncts Mars. And then we know that's a day that's a lot of talking, or Mercury conjuncts Jupiter. And we know that that's a real nice flow. But remember, if you don't know what it means, you can read planets in transit. Okay. Is this making sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, the sun's an interesting one to watch because it actually gives you the whole holiday cycle. We did a class on this and it was a great class, which is, the sun goes through. An example of this is every year when the sun's in Scorpio, what holiday do we get?
Halloween.
Halloween. All the zombies come out. And people are dressed as like witches in wardrobes. They were, or wizards. I mean, and it's like, okay, that's Scorpio behavior, right? So when the sun is going through Scorpio, that's a transit. Did you know that? Anytime the sun goes into a new sign, that is a transit of the sun, right? It's going into a new season. When the sun's in Capricorn, we have Christmas. Okay, so that's actually a transit. So you can actually take the sun and pass it around your chart for 1 year and say, how do I interact with all these holidays? What is my chart doing on Halloween? And you can just, it's at 8, the sun's at 8 Scorpio on Halloween every year. So you can actually look at the 8th degree of Scorpio and say, how do I interact with Halloween? Right, so that's one, the sun cycle is a hand you can watch. Okay. The moon is how am I feeling today? How are people feeling today? And that's the quicker hand, Sage is on that one. So is Shane. And then Saturn is, what are people struggling with right now? Now that one, how far does Saturn travel in a year? What, like 10 degrees or something? Shane?
Saturn is a 12-year cycle, right?
It's
How long is
a
Saturn?
30-year cycle.
Yeah, so about 10 degrees, right?
Okay, so yeah, so if you're a noob or you're a beginner, you're like, I'm gonna check out Saturn for this year and I'm gonna memorize the Saturn transit of this year. And you'll be like, okay, Saturn's at 15 now, it's gonna go back to 12 and it's gonna get up to 18, and that's all I need to know this year is like there's this little Saturn pocket. So you can handle that if you're a noob. Shane, I think what you're thinking of is the Jupiter cycle. Jupiter stays in one sign per year because it's a 12-year cycle. So that's a fun one to watch, is like, what's Jupiter doing this year? And then you're like, okay, Jupiter's in Gemini. I know that piece, that sign piece of the puzzle is like, it's expanding talkativeness and reading abilities or something. And then you can look at the degrees exactly. Now, you're probably saying, how do you look at the degrees? You get a book. I swear to God, you will love your paper ephemeris. Okay, you read it. This is how to read the ephemeris. Okay, when you're an astrologer, you go like this. Oh my God, that's gonna be a good one. Okay, okay, like ooh, oh, okay. have to remedy that thing. Okay, like, okay, I'm going on a date there. Like, I literally will sit here and read my ephemeris for hours, and people are like, "What are you doing? You're just looking at tables." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm looking at more than tables. I'm looking at moods, okay? I'm looking at opportunities and times." Okay. So, I don't know what I would do without my paper ephemeris. Okay, any questions about this act or this slide? Okay. So if you had a magnet board, if you wanted to watch one planet on your chart, print out your chart, put it on a whiteboard with a magnet, put the one magnet of the planet, like Mars, and just say, get your ephemeris and look where it is today and put it on the chart. And then look where it is next week and then move it to that place and notice what does it hit in the chart. Then look a week later, put it a week later, look what does it hit in the chart. It's that putting on the circle and then noticing what it hits that is the calculation. Then you read planets in transit. Okay? Okay. So then we apply this to our natal chart and the charts of a few friends. I really suggest having a notebook with like 5 charts in it, like you, your boyfriend, your son, whoever. And these are people who you can watch their moods, right? You want people who are close enough that you can see what they're up to every day. It's fine to watch a stars chart, but we don't really get into their daily moods. So it's not really that interesting, Um, so that's where you might want to have like magnet boards with like 3 charts on them and then put the magnets on them and then you're moving the magnet and then you see how it hits each chart and you move in the magnet and you see how it hits each chart and that's how you do it. Okay. Let's not get overwhelmed by the 10-handed clock. Start with one hand at a time. Okay. I know that Sage and Shane, you guys are kind of at the place where you can kind of look at 10 hands, and that's great. But like for all the newbies watching this, for all the beginners, don't get overwhelmed. Watch one hand at a time. Okay. So when we're reading or tracking the movements of one planet to our natal chart, we can say like with Mars, when will I or my boyfriend be crabby, right? You just see that Mars cycle. When's it hit an aspect of personality? With you, Sage, you're kind of studying your aspects now. It's like you can actually study Mars and be like, when's it hit this aspect? When's it hit this aspect? And that can be like a Mars study for you, is like Mars on the aspects. Same with you, Shane, is you can say like, what's it like when Mars hits my T-square? What's it like when Mars hits my Venus-Saturn? What's it like when Mars hits my Sun in Virgo? You see what I'm saying? Like, and it takes Mars 2 years to go around the chart. So I think if you say, I'm going to study Mars around my chart for 2 years, you can see Mars on all aspects of personality. With Mercury on your charts, you would say like, how are we communicating? The Sun is like, how are we expressing the holiday and season cycle? The Moon is how are we feeling today? What aspects are getting triggered each day? And the Saturn is what are we struggling with right now? And with Saturn, you want to look at the house and aspects because it moves slower, so we can actually go in and really hone in and say like, you can say like in my chart, Saturn's in my 10th house, so I'm working on career, and in my boyfriend's chart, it's in his 7th house, so he's working on partnership, or like you can actually place Saturn in the sign in the house on those different charts and kind of do some delineation there. Okay. All right, so that lesson was about taking one hand of the clock at a time. Okay. Do we got that? Okay. Remember the chart and magnet board solution. I know I've said that a few times, but in the ancient times, there was something called a pesos, which was a pebble. And they would constantly have charts and put pebbles around them to track the transits. This is not something new to us modern people using magnets. People for thousands of years have known that you have to have a moving object that you can put around a chart to track transits. Otherwise, it gets so confusing. If you're only using a computer program, this is the part where I have to get out my macho man Randy Savage and be like, get off the computer and get onto the page. Use your own pen and paper. Because you'll never really get it if you don't do it yourself. Rah. Okay, that's me getting mad, which is this computer, it can't do astrology for you. You got to get out your little pesos, your little stone, and track this stuff around, and then you'll start to feel in control of the transits, and you're like, okay, this is where everything is today. It's on my chart here. I got this. Okay. Now, astro.com can help you. I do want to take a little break to say one of the cool things that I used to use in astro.com when I was learning is if you go to horoscopes, and then I think it's personal daily horoscope. So I guess this is, it just is looking at, so it's looking at Venus conjunct my Saturn. That's the transit it's looking at, but it's just looking at one transit and delineating it. So that can really help you. It'd be like, okay, so Venus is conjunct my Saturn, and then I can go look at it on the wheel. Like, okay, Venus is in Leo conjunct my Saturn. I can see that. But then you just read about it. That's like having planets in transit right there. And then other transits occurring today. So you can see all the transits in your chart, and you can click on them. You can say, oh, the moon's conjunct my Mars today. And then you can read about it. So Linda, this astro.com, I know you have solar fire, but astro.com might really be nice for you as far as just having someone kind of do the work for you, and then you can check your work and go back and forth kind of thing. The other thing it has is short report forecast. You see this? What this is the bigger transit. So it's like saying Pluto square Sun, Saturn square Neptune, and then you can just go down and read about them. And that's like, it's as if you had planets in transit with you. But that's what they're just doing, is they're placing it on the wheel, and they're seeing, okay, Pluto square Sun. Now we're going to talk about that. Like, so this is someone kind of delineating for you, which is really helpful for where you're at. And I looked at these constantly when I was learning astrology. Now I don't need to. Like, I could delineate these things with like with my eyes closed, But I think for probably 5 to 7 years I looked at this stuff. So all right.
I do use it. I do use it to kind of get a better feel for what I'm doing on my software. So yeah, I had an account, if you will, with them for a while.
Awesome. Okay. All right, here's another way to approach reading the transits. You can explode your aspects onto one wheel at a time. So then we can watch all hands of the clock on one aspect of personality. Okay, so Sage, what's one aspect in your chart that you like?
Well, I like my Sun trine Neptune and Moon.
Okay, and you're Scorpio rising, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have a Moon, Neptune, trine, Sun, and Cancer. Okay, so I just took this and I used my own pen. I didn't use a computer program. And I made a wheel, and I just drew, because I saw her chart the other day. I'm not like a magician. I know what she's talking about. So she's a Sun in Cancer, trine, Moon, Neptune, and Scorpio. Okay, so put one aspect on the wheel. See how we can handle that? We're not overwhelmed. We're not even underwhelmed. We're perfectly whelmed, okay, by this one aspect of personality. And we can even name it. We can be like we could call it like the psychic caregiver from heaven. I don't know. Because she's a Cancer Sun. I'm like, can you take care of me too? Okay, caregiver from heaven. That's what I'm calling it. Okay. So now we're gonna watch the psychic caregiver from heaven get hit by all hands of the clock. Okay, and what we're doing is actually a study of an aspect of personality. Okay, so like Linda, your Sun Mercury conjunction in Pisces, you could study that thing, and just here, I'll draw a wheel for you. See how fast I'm doing this? I've been cutting up pie pieces forever. Okay, so I just drew this right here. See, it's Sun, Mercury conjunct in Pisces in the 4th, okay? So see how that's all that's on this wheel? it's really not hard to understand. You're like, I have a Sun Mercury conjunction Pisces. It makes me want to talk about spiritual topics. I love divinity. I love, spiritual frameworks. That's just Pisces stuff. And Mercury's talking. So it's like, okay, that's what we know about it. We just kind of basically let's call it the spirit talker. Okay. All right. And so then now we can run all transits to this and check it out for the next, like, let's say 6 months. We don't want to overwhelm ourselves, right? So that's where I would get out my ephemeris. I'm sorry, I'm going to use the book, but I got to read forward. You can also use a computer ephemeris, but I want to read forward. So I'm like, so maybe I decide I'm just going to start with the Jupiter hand of the clock. I don't know. So then I just start looking at Jupiter and I'm looking through and I'm like, when's the next time Jupiter's going to hit this Sun trine Moon Neptune? I'm like, so Jupiter's in Gemini right now, which is one sign over from Cancer. And I'm like, well, Jupiter's not going to hit this thing all year long. But when Jupiter goes into Cancer next year, and I know it's going into Cancer because I read my ephemeris, I'm like, oh, Jupiter's going to go into Cancer and it's going to be on her Sun trine Moon Neptune. That's going to be cool. And then I write down the dates for when that Jupiter's going to be there, right? So that is the Jupiter hand of the clock. Now I can go into the Mars hand of the clock, which moves a little faster, and I just start reading in the ephemeris. I'm like, okay, when's it get into a water sign? Because, I know that in a water sign, it will hit this water triangle. So I'm just trying to find places where it's triggering the aspect, right? And so, Mars is in Gemini right now, so I'm like, it's not hitting it right now because Gemini can't see this thing. So I gotta wait until Mars is in Cancer. And when Mars goes into Cancer, it's gonna hit this thing, right? And now, remember, a transit hits in an orb of about 8 degrees leading up to the aspect. So once Mars gets into an 8-degree pocket from, her 14 degrees, so when Mars gets to like 6 degrees of Cancer, I'm going to write that date down, and then Mars goes all the way until about 15, and then it passes that aspect, because when it gets to 1 degree after it passes, so I just write the dates down for that little time window, right? And then you go and you do that with the other planets, and what you're getting here is a calendar for which to study this aspect of your personality. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. So like Shane, you could do a T-square study, right? Where you're like, okay, in the next 6 months, my T-square is popping off on all these times, and now I'm going to really study that. Does that sound like a horror film? No, just kidding. A little bit. Well, you can equally study your sun in Virgo. I know you don't give a lot of attention to that, Shane, but it's like the sun in Virgo and you is really interesting. I watch it all the time. All of a sudden you're building something. I remember the first time I watched a transit too, you were assembling IKEA furniture and you were just like really into it, And you're like, I love assembling stuff. And I thought, well, that's very Virgo. It's like kind of practical, things like that. You could study your Venus Saturn conjunction, right? Like, that would be an interesting one to study. Linda, for you, you have that moon in Taurus you could study. You could study Jupiter in Taurus square Pluto. You see that one?
Mhm.
That's a cool aspect of personality. So this one might make you a little overwhelmed, this homework, because you're like, how do I put the planets? How do I see what's coming? How do I know? And it's like, this is where class after class you'll just learn. But I think what you got to do is just figure out, with your Sun Mercury, Linda, it's like, when is something conjuncting it? When's it sextiling it? When's it squaring it? If that stuff overwhelms you, just look for conjunctions. Just say, when are the planets in Pisces? You could take an ephemeris and look for the next 10 years. When are planets at 27 Pisces? And that's what you track. And that's every conjunction to your Pisces sun. Okay. Any questions or comments about the aspect study? Okay. Okay, what is this? The moon triggers other aspects. This is important for timing research. I don't know what that is. Okay. Consider all angles to that aspect. I don't know what I mean there. Okay. What does it mean if the energies of a transit? Okay. So what does it mean if the energies of a transit planet and the natal planets mix? Okay, so let's say we take Linda's Sun Mercury conjunction in Pisces, and we say what that aspect of personality does is talk about divinity. And the reason we know that is because Mercury talks, the Sun is the vital force, and Pisces is divinity. Okay, let's just say that's how we got that little delineation. Well, what if Mars hits that? How does Mars mix with that, right? The transit of Mars alters this somehow. And that would bring a martial energy to it. So all of a sudden, she's aggressively talking about divinity. She maybe got in a fight with somebody who's like, I don't believe in God. You know, she's like, well, God exists in language or what. Like, we don't know what the fight is going to be, but Mars energy will change it. If Venus hits it, we get a real soft, sweet, artistic vibe to it. You know, so you have to consider the transit energy of the planet hitting it. You know, like Jupiter will expand whatever it's touching. So it's very expansive on the Sun Mercury. So we might see you talking a lot about divinity. Maybe you do a sermon all of a sudden. I mean, I don't know. But the point is, you have to look at the planet that's mixing with the natal aspect to understand more about the transit. That's what my point was. And then you can also look at houses and angles of the transit, depending how advanced you are. I don't want to super go into that now, but okay. Use planets in transit to delineate the angles. Now, so I don't watch my transits in a vacuum. I mean, look at my planets in transit. It's falling apart. I use the frack out of this thing. Like, you know, even if I'm in a hard transit and I'm having a hard time with the transit, I pull out planets in transit and read about the transit. Like, so use planets in transit for the rest of your life. This is something that once you get the technicals down, that's only the first part of the puzzle. The second part is really reading about the transits. Now, if anything makes you nervous in something you read, that's when you work on remediation. So let's say you read about a Mars conjunct the moon, and he's like, you're going to get in fights with people, you're going to be crabby, you're going to be, you know, having a hard time. And if anything scares you, then you go to remedy. Okay, so that's part of watching transits, is not being nervous. When people start seeing the transits, they get nervous for the future. That's like something that happens to students. And I'm like, I just want to cut that out right now. Never be nervous for a transit, because there's always a remedy. There's always something you can do. Okay. Okay. All right, we have 2 minutes now, but I'm going to show you guys how I prep a chart for a transit reading. Like if someone says, read my transits for the next 6 months, I always make them give me 6-month window. That's just me, because otherwise, I mean, I can look at farther out into their chart and say like, what's Pluto going to do for the next 5 years, or what's Pluto, you know, I do a little of that kind of future planning. But okay, so I'm putting my chart out here because I have permission to share it. But look at this. All I do is I start Pluto and I go inward. Okay, so I look at the Pluto hand of the clock because it moves the slowest, and I go through and I just look. It's at 1 degree Aquarius. So I'm like, what's it doing to this chart? Oh, it's squaring Mercury at 2 Scorpio. So I literally write down Pluto square Mercury on the top right of the chart. I just write down that transit. Then I might notice after it does that, it's going to then square Uranus or something. I might notice where's it going, what it's doing. Then I move into the Neptune hand of the clock and I say, okay, what is Neptune doing? Okay, it's trining Mars. Now, it took me years to get this fast. Like, don't be overwhelmed. But I'm saying this is the approach to reading transits in for a reading, is go outer planet inward and literally look at every angle and write them all down, and then kind of study what you would say about them. Or, I mean, this is why prepping chart readings is kind of a bear and it takes a while to do, is you have to see what all the data is and then what you would say about that. I won't go into the details because time's run out, but that's how I prepare the question of what are my transits for the next 6 months, which is a different inquiry, essentially. Okay. Any comments, questions, tears of joy at what you're about to do?
This was great. Thank
Yep.
you. Oh, I mean, I love how you're like having this draw the chart, just get out your piece of paper.
Yeah. Hopefully what you guys will find is when you start drawing charts, your heart will sing. You know, every time you draw a chart, you're like, ah, and I can see that in your chart drawing, Sage. You are a truly meant to be astrologer. Like your chart drawings are beautiful. So, all right, everyone. Well, thank you so much. I always love seeing you at class.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Take care. Bye.